take it away.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming and joining us with the Equity Advisory Group for the Interstate Bridge Project. My name is Dr. Roberta Hunt, she, her pronouns. And let's see, our slides are coming up. All right. So next slide. All right, closed captions in English and in Spanish. English closed captions are available within Zoom and YouTube. Users can follow this link to view both English and Spanish captions in a separate browser window. It's ibr.news/captions. Next slide. How to access closed captions. At the bottom middle of your screen, you should see a menu of options. And if you can't see the menu, hover your mouse over the bottom middle of the screen. Excuse me. Click on the CC icon and a separate window with captions will appear. Okay, next slide. In terms of webinar participation tips, one, thanks for being here. And we definitely encourage members to turn on your video. We love to see you. And I also understand that your people may be running around or your cat. And we still welcome you and love to see you. Please say your name when you begin to speak. And if you experience technical difficulties, please contact program staff at 360-329-6744. Next slide. Public input instructions. There'll be an opportunity to provide brief public input later in the meeting today. To submit input after the meeting, email comments to info@interstatebridge.org with EAG Public Comment in the subject line. Call 888-503-6735 and state EAG Public Comment in your message. Next up. All right, so today we have the program administrator's update. We are going to talk about elevating the equity listening session summary, equity-focused screening criteria for design options, the first draft of the equity framework, and public comment. Okay, next. All right, so for today, our program administrator is not able to be with us today. Our program administrator, Greg Johnson, is not able to be with us today. So Janelle Bell, our principal equity officer, will give that report. Over to you, Janelle.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hunt, and good afternoon, EAG, or evening. Next slide, please. I'll give just a quick overview of sort of program happenings over these past several weeks. We'll start off with the executive steering group, which met on September 15th. They really had an opportunity to have a really robust conversation, but they shared and confirmed ESG understanding of the solutions that do not meet the purpose and need for an I-5 replacement project. You'll recall that we've had robust conversations relative to what the purpose and need is. And so the ESG has been spending some time talking through those items. They also discussed progress on the IVR technical work towards an IVR solution, including desired outcomes, screening criteria, which we'll talk more about later this evening, and preliminary design options. And so the ESG is really making progress towards the goal of an IVR solution later next year, early next year. The next meeting will be on October 21st. They will seek alignment and an agreement in principles on desired outcomes, screening criteria, and the screening process. Really an opportunity for the ESG to check in and ensure that everyone is aligned in terms of moving forward. Next slide, please. We also had our community advisory group meeting on September 2nd. And CAG had an opportunity of receiving the presentation that this advisory group has received in the past relative to the IBR equity framework. And so they really had a great opportunity to really digest that information and ask questions of program staff. They also received a historical perspective of transit options from previous planning efforts and the IBR process going forward in the transit decision-making process. So that was a hot topic of consideration. The community working group have been started, and 9 members of CAG are serving across 4 different working groups. Incidentally, you'll recall that the program has stood up the working groups focused on various programmatic areas such as Hayden Island, downtown Vancouver, so on and so forth. And we have cross-pollination members of CAG serving on each of those working groups. And obviously, as program material start to be generated out of those working groups, EAG will have an opportunity of weighing in as well. The next meeting will be on October 7th. Cannot believe we are already in October, but October 7th. Next slide, please. I think that's it for the updates.
Yeah, figured we would do some Q&A, answer as much as we can, even though Greg is not here, but got a few minutes.
Jake, can you fix the screen, because I see myself and I'm delightful, but I really don't need to see myself in this like kind of way.
Dr. Hunt, so click on view and then go to gallery.
Okay, good. So it's not just, okay, there we go. Whew. Much better. Okay. So does anybody have any questions for Janelle?
Or just general about goings on with the IBR program.
No?
I do have a quick question for you. Well, I don't know how quick it is. Could chime in.
Yeah, go for it, Matt.
Hi, this is Matt with Disability Rights Oregon. So I wanted to ask, it says that the ESG examines solutions that do not meet the purpose and need. And I'm just kind of curious, like, can you talk a little bit more about what exactly you mean by that? Like, what solutions, like, what are some examples of solutions that the ESG would have found not to meet the purpose and need? Or what are some examples of solutions that would? Like, are we talking about, were these broad solutions or were these like proposed solutions for the project?
I can take that.
Was it like a comprehensive solution that was proposed?
So there were, yeah, there have been a lot of ideas out there, different alternatives that they looked at back during the CRC and found that they didn't meet purpose and need. So it was a chance to clearly articulate that in a public setting. So some examples, a tunnel, a third bridge, but keeping the current IBR bridge there, or the current interstate bridge there. Looking at a high-speed rail as a potential solution. So these are things that this program doesn't preclude certain things happening. We can't say there will never be a tunnel or never another bridge or high-speed rail, but there are things that for this particular project did not meet the purpose and need. So we went through a handful of those. There are that full meeting and then the slide deck, and that you can find on the website if you want to go into see some of those, go into some more detail. Hope that answers it, Matt.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments before we move on? All right, we're going to move on. And if you need to bring something up or something springs to mind, please bring it forward. Happy to hear you. All right, so now we're going to talk about mini grants and elevating equity listening sessions. We get to talk to Salome Chimuku. Salome is going to talk with us about recent equity-centered community engagement updates. Will be followed with a Q&A. So Salome, turning it over to you. You're on mute.
Yes, I was giving directions to my dog to hush now, which y'all didn't need. Hi, everyone. Salome here, she, her pronouns. And I'm here to give you an update about the mini grants and the Elevating Equity listening sessions that we had this past August. Next slide, please. So first off with the mini grant applications, we had about 14 applicants, 4 that work directly with Washington, Clark County, or just Vancouver, 6 that are Oregon-based organizations, and 4 that serve both the Multnomah County and Clark County area. You can see here a list of organizations that apply, such as Activate Inclusion, Brown Hope, Coalition of Communities of Color, Latino Build Association for Contractors, Northwest Association for Blind Athletes, National Association of Minority Contractors of Oregon. Next up, Outside In, Partners in Careers, Slavic Community Center of the Northwest, Somali American Council of Oregon, the Street Trust, Unite Oregon, and Washington Advocacy for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Next slide, please. So these are the dates of the total 9 sessions that we had on elevating equity. We focused on all of the different communities of concern as outlined by the program that we haven't provided an initial introductory listening session for. Some of you may recall we had some back in February that were focused on youth and the general population of communities of concern, and also one in Spanish. And so we decided the month of August that we would try to reach out to the other communities of concern. So we had one for people living with disabilities, 2 sessions focused on BIPOC individuals, that's Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We had 1 session for houseless individuals and families, another for older adults, and then we had 4 language-specific sessions, Vietnamese, Chinese, Somali, and Russian. Next slide, please. So here's some high-level notes about all of the different sessions. So when these slides are made, we actually had a couple more sessions afterwards. So last I checked, we have a little bit over 130 participants overall. And we had just about 75 to about 80 people live in the room. Other folks had sent in their responses via email or called later due to other reasons. A lot of 9 out of 10 were first-time participants. So a majority of the room were folks who had never been engaged with the program before. This is their first time accessing us directly. A lot of folks in these sessions found out through social media, primarily Facebook, as well as word of mouth. Some folks were referred by others who had joined us in February, while others just heard from either an organization that they followed that we were having these sessions. And last check, we had about 8 of 10 participants say that they would participate in something like this again, say that they found it highly engaging and really useful for them. We had media presence at both BIPOC sessions, which I'll get into a little bit later. And many mentions and contact information of different organizations that serve in the community. This is something that I want to highlight because during the month of August is when we had our mini grant application open. And so a lot of the applications that came in were folks who either had community members or even staff that had participated in a listening session, found out about the mini grant program, and then applied. Or they applied ahead of time, but then sent their own members or staff to get acquainted with the program to make them decide whether or not they wanted to apply for a mini grant. Next slide, please. So here's some high-level notes about the people living with a disability session that we had. A lot of folks submitted their feedback by email or phone call. Some attended in other sessions. Many were from Washington, were professionals and from organizations, but a lot of the Oregon participants were community members that had found out through other means. Most found out through our EAG members, Matt Hines and Matt Sears. So thank you to the both of you. And Matt Sears actually was present at that listening session. There was a comment that there need to be better advertisement or acknowledgement of accessibility. A lot of folks were emailing in saying that they had assumed that we wouldn't have closed captioning or ASL interpretation. So that kind of gave us the note that we need to do a better job of putting out in the forefront that we provide those services for folks and that they're provided in our public engagement. We collected contact information for organizations that serve this community. And one participant in particular said that they really appreciated having this affinity session and wanting more affinity sessions. And for those who are not familiar with that term, what it means is more sessions that are centered around a specific community and less of the one giant meeting for everyone in terms of communities of concern. And so having a session that was focused on people living with a disability and centered around those community members really made people feel more comfortable to participate. Next slide, please. At our BIPOC listening sessions, we had a majority of Black participants. Many left Monday's meeting to join Wednesday's meeting due to media presence. We were so thrilled that a lot of people registered and word of mouth traveled pretty far that it did get media attention, which left some of Monday's participants deciding that they wanted to participate on Wednesday, hoping that there wouldn't be outside media recording the meetings. Most of the participants in the BIPOC sessions were from Oregon. A lot of folks in this session in particular called for protected affinity sessions. So they wanted to have more of a space in which the program was engaging with them in a way that didn't involve outside media recording. A lot of participants stay there discomfort with it. Others said that they wanted more direct outreach and less mass outreach. What they meant by that was things like the listening sessions, reaching out to organizations in which they get resources from is more of what they want to see, less of general advertisement aimed at the whole community, but seeing IBR in specific spaces helped to get them into the room. Next point they made was a lot of the different people who attended in these BIPOC sessions represented many various social media groups. So a lot of folks belong to very culturally specific or identity specific Facebook groups such as Black Portland. Others were part of People of Color of the Northwest, which included Washington and Oregon. Others were a part of culturally specific Facebook groups. And that kind of outreach is what they deem to be necessary due to displacement and gentrification, making the community physically separated. And it really expressed how these Facebook groups and other social media groups have helped them stay connected and is really effective in reaching out to them. And the last point they wanted to make is they suggested always providing updates before asking for feedback. And what that is that they really appreciated the structure of the listening session, starting out with a program update and their ability to ask questions before being asked to provide their input and what they had to say in response. Next slide, please.
So let me real quick. I did want to mention, just since I was a part of those the BIPOC listening sessions and the thing with the media, and it was certainly not ideal, but we essentially had to allow media to attend based on public records laws, unfortunately. And so that was something we didn't quite expect, and that was an unfortunate occurrence, but that's why we needed to let them.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Jake. I would also say that participants of this session, although Monday session, as I stated earlier, a lot of people left and joined Wednesday session. They definitely felt more comfortable Wednesday to engage with us when we had the ability to explain to them the situation and help make sure that folks felt that they could be honest and candid still, even with someone else outside of IBR recording the meeting. And so these are some of the high-level notes from the houseless and lower income listening session. So the first thing that we noticed in those sessions was that many folks couldn't participate unless they had a smartphone or access to a computer. So a lot of participants were sharing devices. So we had one device kind of logged in, but multiple people using that one device. They expressed wanting more in-person options, or maybe physically printed surveys. The community understood that with COVID restrictions, we couldn't have in-person meetings. But one thing that they offered was maybe we could at least have physically printed surveys with these questions and the slides provided in different organizations. So that way they can access them physically, if not being able to meet in a public space. A lot of the people that attended the session had a deep concern about those who would be displaced that camp in the program area during the construction, and wondering how are we going to help those people? Where will they be asked to move? How are we going to manage making sure that if there are sweeps that occur, people get their belongings back and people are kept safe? The next point folks made was a huge valuing of transit options to common camping areas and places of resources. Delta Park was mentioned. Some organizations were mentioned as well as we move forward as a program, looking at not only expanding transit, but specifically making sure that transit is helping people access resources and organizations and areas. Another point people highlight for us was to work with organizations and resource centers to reach the community, neighborhood, community centers, organizations such as Outsiders In, Outside In, Sisters of the Road were mentioned, working with case managers, just basically working with folks who directly work with this community, because this community does move around quite a bit. And sometimes it can be hard to get in contact with them. But if we want to really engage with them, trying to be at places that they are at and engage with them in a way that allows them to give us feedback when they can and are able, as opposed to wanting them to join advisory boards or things of that nature, and more kind of popping in and out engagement for them. A lot of folks also said that they really appreciated the aspect of us providing gift cards to participants, and they attribute this to helping with the invisible costs of being houseless. Many of them talked about in their day-to-day life that there are expenses that happen that people don't really think about, that sometimes organizations can't help with directly. And so having these gift cards, even though they were limited to Fred Meyer and Target, kind of help folks have and deal with some of the invisible costs of being houses, such as sanitary needs, masks, hygiene products, and also things like phone cases and other protective gear for their belongings and essentials. Next slide, please. The older adults listening session, we had a very lively group in that one. They were very happy to receive a program update before we got started. Some of the participants lived on Hayden Island, or actually were moving to Hayden Island, and had a really robust conversation about that, and wanted to know where things are moving forward. About half of the room were renters or people that lived on fixed income. And they really wanted folks on the program to understand that many older adults live on fixed income. And so things like tolling, rise in property value could really impact some of these older adults that live on a fixed income. They had deep concerns about outreach and how we're going to do outreach during this construction period. Surveyors, construction teams going out there, and how in advance they would get notifications of things, but also mentioning that they understand there's multiple infrastructure projects going on by WashDOT and ODOT, and wanting to make sure that we as a program focus on our program, but understand that there are other infrastructure programs happening, and making it easier for those who are receiving these updates to know which updates go with what program, but the ability to ask one program about, was this your surveying team on my property today? But that program still being able to answer like, no, it wasn't us, but it looks like it was this program over here, and being willing to help find resource information for them. And lastly, they had a lot of support about strengthening public transit, mostly from a need perspective of some of the older adults talking about their inability to drive, or as people age, not being able to drive, and wanting other options that could be helpful to increase not only their ability to live independently, but their ability to be self-sustaining and to move around. Next slide, please. Our Vietnamese listening session, we had a lot of questions regarding construction and tolling, and how we can do tolling equitably. A lot of folks, this is their first time hearing about concerns around tolling and how that can be equitable. A lot of folks are grateful to have the session in Vietnamese, and we're happy to hear that there were other language-specific listening sessions, and thought that this was a credit to the program focusing on equity. Many travel beyond just the Portland and Vancouver, but work within the program area. And so what that meant was that a lot of folks said that they used the bridge to go beyond what we perceive as the program area, and also didn't live in the program area, but are frequent users. And so some of them mentioned being Uber and Lyft drivers, yellow cab drivers, others talking about commuting to one community living on the Vancouver side to another community living like in Happy Valley. And so the idea of using the bridge to even go outside the program area. They also supported investing in transit if we want people to use it. So many folks who mentioned car use on the bridge said that they would be more willing to use transit if it was available and a little bit more dependable for them. And they also said that they would like more sessions like this, and appreciated getting gift cards for their time, because a lot of them haven't been really involved too much on public infrastructure programs because they didn't think there was a place for them to be involved. and the hearing that there was going to be an update and then also a gift card really helped a lot of folks feel like they should participate and be a part of the discussion. Next slide, please. Our Chinese listening session, I just want to note that we had it in Mandarin as well as in Cantonese, and they were happening simultaneously. So we, again, got a lot of questions in regard to how can we make tolling equitable, and if that isn't even a thing. A lot of folks are grateful about the session, including Mandarin as well as Cantonese. Folks in the session say that they wish that the slides had been translated so that way they could be a little bit more prepared instead of relying on live translation. A lot of folks talked about supporting rapid transit. And again, more appreciation for the gift cards, and felt that it was a physical representation of us valuing their time, specifically in this session. And a lot of folks mentioned that their use of the bridge was going to Hayden Island and the Jansen Beach shopping center there. So a lot of them were more or less using the bridge for recreation, shopping, and a nice in between for people on the Vancouver side and Portland side to meet up in the middle. Next slide, please. So in the Somali listening session, one thing that stood up the most for this one is a lot of folks suggested that we move forward in speaking with Uber and Lyft drivers and yellow cab drivers. A lot of the folks in that community said that they have defined groups of Somali drivers that work for these companies that would love to participate in something like this. And so they really encouraged us to do a session like this again, working specifically with those workers. They also think that we should move into more Somali spaces and Somali radio. And I guess another thing is that they really wanted us to know that beyond just seeing family and friends and work, the bridge connects a lot of the Somali community to the mosques in the area. And so there is that added layer of reliance on the bridge. Next slide, please.
Salome,
Yes.
I want to, we have about 5 minutes for questions.
Yep, I'm just gonna wrap up real fast.
Cool.
So Russian listening session, very similar to the rest in regards to tolling. A lot of folks said they started to hear more of our advertisements on Russian radio and social media groups. And really were excited that they were having a session in Russian and talking, and some of the members were business owners, so I had a lot of questions in regard to how businesses would be impacted by the tolling. Next slide, please. And I think that's actually it. Yep, that was the last one. So I am available for any questions that you may have. I know that I just threw a lot of information at you, but that was the month of August.
Caitlin, and then Tanya. All right, Tanya, you're up and Caitlin will follow.
My question was about the gift cards. And you said the stores that the people were able to go to. For people who are don't have homes, are these stores convenient for them to get to? I know sometimes we give gift cards, but you can't get to the store because it's not that easy to get to, or it costs additional funds to be able to get there.
Yes, that's a great question. So the two card options were Fred Meyer and Target. And I know that there are plenty of Fred Meyers and Targets that are near and around transit. I would say that what helped for some people, just doing some follow-up with people who emailed with questions, was being able to use the card online as well as in the store. And from what I understood from one person, being able to purchase stuff online and then pick it up in the store was really nice. And for others, having access to send whatever they bought online to a resource center that they frequent, or maybe a family member's home that they go to, made it a bit easier. There was some asking of the gift cards being more of the Visa gift cards that can be used anywhere. And so I know that we as a program are going to be discussing that or revisiting that, but there are some unique barriers due to receiving federal funding in regards to what kind of incentives we can give to folks.
Thank you. So I was just wondering about people who live in camps, sometimes, you just don't have that access. So, all righty. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Caitlin, are you up for it?
I did not mean to raise my hand if I did have my hand raised. I'm sorry, but I will just say thank you for sharing the information. Thorough and super helpful as always. I appreciate all the work you guys are doing and just look forward to diving in and making sure it's getting reflected in the program.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Great. Well, I think we're gonna pivot. So thank you so much, Salome, for your report out. And I'm going to shift to Jake, who is going to talk with us about the equity-focused screening criteria for design options.
All right. Everybody's favorite topic here, screening. Oh, I'm sharing myself. That's funny. Okay, is everyone seeing a PowerPoint now? So screening criteria. We are hoping to kind of close this out with this meeting and a quick homework assignment following it. Before I get into report out, and I'll ask both Steve and Lily were part of the subcommittee that we formed around this. I'll ask them to chime in as much as they would like to. But quick refresher, again, you've seen this, but just to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're talking about with screening criteria for design options. So the design options that we are trying to figure out as a pretty fundamental piece of this program are the high capacity transit option. So, is it a frequent and rapid bus? Is it light rail? Where does it go? Where are the stops, etc. The lanes that will be on the bridge and through the program area, number of lanes and auxiliary lanes, those temporary lanes that allow you to get between interchanges. Interchange improvements, so the on and off ramps to access the highway, as well as all that infrastructure that goes around them, and active transportation, so bike and pedestrian improvements throughout the program area. So the screening criteria is for us to look at the different trade-offs between different options, and try to, in our case, try to figure out what options and what elements have the most potential to really advance the equitable outcomes that we're looking to advance. So does that, before we get into that, any kind of lingering questions about kind of this concept of screening criteria? I know it took me a while to really wrap my head around what this is, so I just want to make sure. So a quick summary of some of the things in our subcommittee. We've now met, I believe, 3 times. And the latest, we really dove into this big table, big menu of various criteria that are some or several related to equity, but also a lot that aren't. So there's a lot of criteria that are going into all this. Well, one exercise that we did is the group went through the various criteria, and we looked at where the program staff, what we had put together was saying, okay, we think that this criteria is equity focused. This criteria we specifically brought and added to the table because we heard from the EAG, et cetera. And instead of just saying, is it related to equity, what equity objectives of those 6 that we've developed, what do they connect to? What objectives do they support? A couple things that in the feedback I got from the group was we had several cases where we were saying we should ask the EAG about destinations and origins in the program area that we would measure access to, like how a design option would improve or impact access. But it's really a bigger question than the EAG. We need to ask the community those types of questions. So that is something we'll take directly to our community engagement team as they ramp up those efforts in the fall. I believe I said this or shared this last time, but the importance of east-west connectivity, because we are talking about a freeway that goes north and south through this area, but how can we truly make it so that we don't further put barriers between communities, and how can we improve that connectivity between communities? Because east-west travel in this area is pretty critical, pretty important. There's a lot that happens. There were several criteria on this menu that staff had indicated they believed there was a tie to equity there, but in looking at them, not really so much. We couldn't really match up which equity objectives they really supported. So one of those, for example, was looking at whether a design option is compatible with local land use plans. And that kind of assumes that equity was fully considered in the development of that plan. And we can't really assume that. So now I'm going to dive into this Word document where, bear with me, there's a lot on this. Actually, and before I do at the high level, let me ask for Lily or Steve, do you have anything big picture wise you would like to add at this point? Getting a no from Lily. All right.
On my side, Jake, not really. I think the team, we debated, we shared ideas, and we also wanting to hear what the broader group will say. And hopefully we can help to answer some of our thinking when they ask their questions.
Yeah.
There was a lot, we would have loved more time, but there wasn't a lot of time.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. And so that's why we're hoping to wrap this up here. We've incorporated past discussions from this group in the development of this criteria, and tried to do as best we could to make them meaningful and hopefully really align with our objectives and our commitments around centering equity. So let me pull up this document. I'm going to send this out after, and I'm going to ask for anyone who would like to go in and do some additional comments on this to do so this week. Because I think that's probably the best way to do it. We've had these conversations, but now it's really nitty gritty. So want to give everyone an opportunity to try to go in and get into the weeds here. So the way this works, so I mentioned the objectives that we tied to the various criteria. And so we've got those abbreviations here. And the kind of point of doing that is to say, you know, are we missing some? Are we staying true to these? So in going through, we definitely have elements from each of these objectives that's supported by these. But I'll go through the highlights of what we really, I guess, changed about or recommend changing about what was already developed. So one thing in our conversation that Matt emphasized that was kind of missing from things is we didn't have a measure that was going to look at pedestrian impacts as far as noise, which is particularly important for people who are visually impaired or blind, who rely so much on sound to navigate. And so how does the design, what is the design going to look like for the pedestrian experience and for people with disabilities as well as general population. You know, how are people going to be exposed to pollutants and noise as they walk across the bridge? We have certain things like how noise and pollution will impact schools and hospitals. Those were already in there. And we have this recurring theme, which I've mentioned, and we've talked about, of equity priority areas as a way to say, with our equity definition, all these demographics, how do we focus on those areas to really hone in on where the impacts would most likely be felt the strongest, or have the highest opportunity to benefit. So there was a criteria around contaminated sites. This was a question that all of us had, that we were unclear about what really this meant. I'm going to zoom in a little here too. Contaminated and hazardous sites. It's this kind of, so it was a question that was unclear, and I had a conversation with the staff who were leading this, and it ended up being kind of this qualitative, kind of nebulous thing that really didn't have a clear tie to equity. So recommending that not be considered in an equity specific criteria there. Cultural resources, I think this was something I recall it was Steve who was talking about, not just where the number of different historic, archaeological, cultural resources are with different, and how that relates to the design options, but what does access to those mean under different design options? Is it improved? Is it harmed, etc.? So really getting more to not just them being there, but what the access is. There's going to be leftover land from this project that will have some opportunity for development, but just the area of developable land doesn't necessarily mean anything for equity, because it could be developed in any way. So added this with the potential for development that benefits equity priority groups. It's still kind of a vague term, but what we can do certain things like, is this piece of land, could it be used for example, affordable housing? Could it be used for community space? That sort of thing that really isn't just, could this be a luxury high rise? I mentioned really wanting to do community engagement instead of relying on the EAG for looking at certain elements of this where we had listed that. I think that is something that we can't necessarily ask. We're open to hearing your thoughts, certainly, and what type of destinations and locations are important in the program area, but we don't want to hinge it on what we hear from you, because we definitely want to do a thorough engagement of the community. Displacement is certainly a huge deal with a project like this. So we want to specifically look at potential displacement of businesses owned by people of color or people with disabilities, and then separately looking at number of displaced households. And the proxy to do this, the tricky thing is we don't have the granular data to say, you know, this household is low income, this particular household is from X community. So as a way to do that, we kind of have to say, are they in our equity priority areas? At least that's kind of the proposed solution here. A piece of feedback was looking at improved or impacted access to properties. I clarified that the question that one of the members had was, are these should be looked at separately, improved versus impacted. I just confirmed with staff that that is the case, but they just included it all in one statement here for this criteria. I want to highlight this potential for improved access or additional access points to the Columbia River. That was something we heard early on from this group. In particular, there's an annual powwow that happens with I believe it's canoes on the river. That is something that we've talked about as staff, as how can we maybe provide some sort of benefit here as part of this project that makes that incorporated into the whole area. It makes it a sort of more highly showcased event that the infrastructure can support. Mentioned not wanting to get between communities or further barriers between communities, and especially again here because of the east-west connections. There's a few more here looking at facilities or services that are identified as important to communities of concern. That is kind of qualitative. We do welcome your thoughts as to what those are. I had a conversation with Matt Hines about certainly the area where there's a lot of services. There's the school for the blind, there's a school for the deaf. There's several other things in the pocket just east of the program area that, that we'll want to focus on. Going through these are, and again, I'll send this out so that you can dive into your heart's content. Added this community engagement piece for origins and destinations, as I mentioned. We could use some advice on some guidance as to how we might ask the community about that. I do want to mention real quick this new kind of tool or methodology that came out that's pretty cutting edge. I can go into the details with anyone who's curious, but it's basically a way to look at how to look at accessibility for specific populations or demographics, but you don't have to do it from a single point. You don't have to say, okay, from this point, how many jobs can someone access who is, let's say, Hispanic Latino? You can instead, through this methodology, look at the entire Hispanic Latino population and kind of aggregate what access looks like. And you could compare on design option A, what does that mean in terms of the number of jobs that can be accessed by Hispanic Latino households or workers? And option B, how do those compare? How do they perform? And so that's something that's pretty exciting. Actually just reached out to them and just heard back today with a more detailed methodology that we'll be able to apply, and it seems really promising. And then a few more here about jobs access, access to high capacity transit, again, using this equity priority groups shorthand for our communities and our equity definition. Travel time, where people can get definitely from certain points. We'll be doing that as well as the overall accessibility. Households without a vehicle within proximity of active transportation facility. And then gaps in existing infrastructure, to look at it kind of from the other side, like not just what's being added, but where does that, how is that maybe being filled in by a certain design option? And specifically in equity priority areas, who's mostly benefiting. Then finally here in the recommended criteria, just added this, looking at origins and destinations through community engagement. We removed a handful, like I mentioned. I'll just quickly scroll through these. So looking at compatibility with land use plans wasn't necessarily a compelling equity focused screening criteria. Developable land itself does not inherently benefit equity priority communities. So we did not think on its own it should be considered an equity focused screening criteria. And then a bunch of them that aren't just on their own, similar story. For like here, delay at intersections within the program area. You could argue that it impacts travel times or safety or accessibility, but unless you're looking at specific groups or specific travelers, that's not really an equity measure. Just like boardings, ridership, on their own, they're great, but really who is benefiting is the central question that we're always asking here. So that is a I'm getting a thumbs up from Lily. That makes me feel good. Thank you, Lily. But so with that, like I said, we'll be sending it out, and you can actually go in and comment, send your questions. But the goal is the executive steering group is going to be reviewing the detailed screening criteria next month. So we want to make sure that we're getting the EAG's feedback to them before that.
Dr. Hunt, if I could just chime in for a second and thank our subcommittee for, in addition to serving on the EAG, has spent considerable time meeting with Jake and the IBR team to really roll up their sleeves on this material. So big shout out and thanks to that end. The other piece is, that's the first time, Jake, I had a chance to kind of hear all of that material, and pretty blown away. I mean, I think what we don't, I think, spend enough time here around the EAG table doing is really highlighting that this committee and this work is really on the cutting edge of how do you really integrate equity into a mega project, and the screening criteria, I think, is one way by which to do that. So really appreciate that work.
Jonelle, as we were talking about, I should also mention that, so this is kind of at the front end of things, but the idea is we will bring back to the EAG as the screening occurs, we'll bring back some of those results, see if it actually matches up with what we were hoping to get out of this, and have that discussion.
Excellent. Any questions or concerns for the good of the order? All right, I am going to pass now to Chris Lepe, who's going to go through the draft framework for the equity framework. And we'll talk about where the EAG has shaped elements. So Chris, if you will walk us through it.
Sounds good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So I think what I'm going to do is do a little share screen here, if that's possible. So let me try to attempt this here. Can you guys hear, see my screen?
Yep.
Yep. All right. Awesome. So, so as you guys know, I'm on the equity team for the program, and I've been helping to develop the draft equity framework for the IBR program with input from the EAG and support from our IBR program equity team. And as a reminder, the equity framework is essentially like a blueprint or a guide to help the program create a more equitable project and program. And we sent out the draft framework last week, and hopefully all of you had a chance to review it. The idea is to have a discussion today to obtain your input on how to improve the document and return next month for potential adoption. And I want to make clear that while that's the proposed date for adoption, we want to make sure that the document meets your expectations before approval. The contents of the framework include a one-page introduction followed by the meat of the document, which is a section on operationalizing equity. And this section includes a discussion about the roles and accountability for the framework, followed by the equity definition, principles, and objectives. The final section under operationalizing equity, which you'll begin developing next month, actually, is to provide a placeholder for measurable and actionable outcomes, including performance measures. The framework also includes a toolbox, and this toolbox includes items such as the equity lens and equity index. We also have a placeholder for a glossary and authors and contributors to be developed for the final version. So I'm going to spend another couple of minutes here walking through what I think are some of the key takeaways for the framework. So I'm going to just scroll down here. So see on page 3 here, we talk about why the equity framework. This is the introduction section, in which we discuss the legacy of inequitable transportation and land use planning, and state the program's commitment to doing things differently. We convey the role of the framework in helping to advance equity as part of this process and some of the components of the framework document. And then finally, we discuss how the framework was developed, including with EAG input and how it will be used moving forward. Next up is operationalizing equity. As I mentioned, the meat of the matter. And we get into, at first, the accountability structure, describing the roles and responsibilities in implementing the framework, including the role of the EAG, program team leads, the equity team, and the program administrator. We then introduce the equity definition, principles, and objectives. Just scroll down here. And all of these we collectively developed, right? So this equity definition was something that the EAG led on and developed, including process and outcome equity. And the equity principles, which we rebranded from our last conversation. We were calling it equity commitments, but we felt like equity principles was more kind of nailing it on the head. Equity commitments we're interpreting as being more of the who, what, where, when, and how. So a series of commitments that will flow from the framework and from the process. So you guys can correct us if we're wrong on that note. But that's where we thought about kind of repackaging or rebranding that piece of the document. And then we have the equity objectives. As you guys are no stranger to the equity objectives. We've had these developed for a while, and these cover the themes of mobility, accessibility, physical design, community benefits, economic opportunity, decision-making processes, and avoiding further harm. Finally, we have under this section the component of measurable and actionable outcomes. And so that as I mentioned, is starting next month, the arena where you guys are going to start to dive into, in particular in developing these performance measures. As we note here, how will we know if we've achieved these equitable outcomes that we're seeking? So the final piece that I'll say, the final really significant component is the equity toolbox. And this is really going to be developed moving forward in partnership with the EAG and program staff. And it'll be a series of tools which include the equity lens, the equity index, and a best practices review as well, to make sure that we're really trying our best to push the envelope as it relates to equity. So this will include ongoing consultation with the EAG over the course of the program, and will help to ensure effective application of the framework. So with that, I think that essentially sums up the document. I think what I'll do now is open it up for any clarifying questions, and then we're going to have breakout groups to discuss the framework in greater detail. So any questions for kind of clarification?
I think let's just, oh, here's Matt. And then
Yeah,
maybe
so-
after Matt, let's jump in.
Okay. So this is Matt Sears with Disability Rights Oregon. I just had a quick clarifying question about the sort of the blank spots, like best practices, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I think I understand that that's going to be part of the final document, but just hasn't been totally sussed out yet. Is that right?
Yeah, the best practices review is going to take more analysis and study, right? So there's going to have to be this research that takes place, and we can't knock it out at this point. So we're talking something that's going to take probably several months, and was something that was at our last EAG meeting that was proposed. So we're including it so that it's stated. It's going to be a work product, and there's other components like the performance measures, right, that aren't going to be fully wrapped up by the time we do the final version of this document next month, presumably. But that's the intent, is to have these kind of a couple placeholders that are going to be further refined and developed. I don't know if John L, Jake, or anybody else wants to chime in.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit of commentary. This is John L speaking. Matt, that's a great question. Partly, we want to lift every rock again. We know that while we did a cursory review relative to integrating equity into a project of this size and find a whole lot of great material. We want to go back out to the industry, chat with partners to find out whether or not there are some good examples out there of things that EAG ought to consider, the program ought to consider, particularly as we start to have conversations relative to potential community benefits, other ways for us to be measuring equity, so on and so forth. And so that we want to be thorough and would frankly invite any member from the EAG who want to be a part of that literature review, if you will, to work with us on that, so that we're not reinventing the wheel. And the last thing I'll say is that's going to be particularly important as we think about future construction specifications, for example, directions we want to give to contractors relative to some of our equity measures. We don't pretend that we have the best examples in the world here in the Pacific Northwest. Maybe we do, but we need to do further review.
Lily.
Great, Lily.
Just a quick question about the best practices thing to follow up on what Matt brought up. I guess I am wondering if you are considering the distinction between best practices as this is the most commonly used practice versus this is the practice that seems to produce the best results.
I think it's both. And I would even venture out to say promising practices. It's an opportunity for us to be creative, I think, because we do want to be pushing the envelope. And I agree with sort of the sense of where I think you're going with that question, which is oftentimes, particularly with respect to communities of concern, a lot of the interventions and things that we know could potentially work may not be a best practice. And we don't want to miss out on those opportunities because it's not checked off by an academic institution, and so on and so forth. So that's where I think really going into our networks, I think about Policy Link, I think about other efforts out there nationally and frankly internationally that we can really review along our 6 objectives is the opportunity that we have.
Sounds good. Any final questions before we jump into our breakout rooms? Roberta, did you want to kind of highlight the different questions? You want me to sound them off here?
I'm happy to.
Okay.
So the 3 questions that people are going to work on and are So the questions are, does the document capture your aspirations for a guiding framework? Are there elements that could be improved to make them more clear or actionable? And what challenges do you anticipate the program having in implementation? How might we prepare to address those challenges? Right? So does the document do what you does it say the things you want it to say? Are there elements that could be improved? And what are the challenges that you anticipate when it comes to actually doing this, implementing this document? All right, Chris? Okay, so Brent is going to place members into 3 breakout rooms. We're going to be in groups for about 20 minutes or so. And we're going to assign, we're going to answer these 3 questions. So please, as you all are thinking about things that you would like, please be as specific as you can. It's really helpful to the group if there is something that is in your mind that you feel like needs to be there. The more specific you can be in terms of what that is, what it can look like, what the better, because we're really trying to get as clear as we can. All right, So Brent, please put us where we belong and off we go.
Just want to verify 20 or 25. Which one would you prefer today?
Let's go for, let's see, how are we on time? I think we can do 20. Is that correct? Yeah, 20. We also have smaller groups today.
Sounds good. Opening all groups now.
Thanks, friends.
Welcome to everyone on YouTube. Thank you for joining us tonight. Here are some public comment instructions if you'd like to give comment via verbal live on the phone tonight. To make a live comment via phone, dial 253-215-8782. The meeting ID is 986-0940-5983. The passcode is 701376. You'll be put in a waiting room, and then once you're accepted to the meeting, you'll dial *9 to raise your hand. I will call on you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. You'll dial *6 to unmute yourself. You'll also be prompted to unmute, and please provide your name and affiliation. You'll be given about 2 minutes to speak. If we run out of time and you have not had a chance to speak, you can still provide public comment after the meeting. You can submit the public comment after the meeting by filling out the comment form on the program website, or email your comments to info@interstatebridge.org with EAG Public Comment in the subject line. You can also call 888-503-6735 and state EAG Public Comment in your message. Written comments need to explicitly say EAG Public Comment in the subject line or in the body of the message for them to be identified and distributed to EAG members. All written comments must be received prior to 48 hours in advance of each upcoming meeting in order to be distributed to advisory group members. Comments received after that point will be distributed to members in advance of their next meeting. And I'll put the dial-in information up here again, and look forward to hearing from you when we get to our public comment, which will be almost immediately after we return from our breakouts.
All right, good thing I was taking some notes. Go.
Steve, now I'm going to have that song stuck in my head, though, of course. So.
So, okay, looks like we have everybody in the room now. Huh? Excellent. So, let's see, who should we go with first in the report out? I don't think we had like group numbers. Roberta?
I can report out for our group.
Okay.
So our group had a pretty lively discussion, and any of y'all can chime in if I get anything wrong, but I tried my best to get their comments into the format of the questions. So when it came to the aspirations, many in the group agreed that the intent and the aspirations of the document meet what they wanted or expected. There was just some discussion that I think came through more for the other questions, where there was a real deep concern about question number 2, like what are the elements that can be improved and make it more clear or actionable? A lot of folks are wondering like what leadership groups, what other parts of IBR, since it is a massive program, are actually waiting on this document to be completed before they do work. Who's actually going to use this document once it's completed? And how will we be holding folks, whether it's our partners or different program staff, accountable when they are not meeting the aspirations of this document or the things outlined in this document. In that discussion, we also talked about an element that could be improved would be, this could be written into future contractors and developers agreements. Understand this program has a lot of different firms that it consults with or works with, making sure that this is seen as an agreement that when working with IBR that you are also adopting this framework and these standards. And if not, trying to decide and figure out who will be holding those folks accountable and how we can hold them accountable. When it came to question number 3, what challenges do you anticipate the program having in implementation? One comment that was, I think, relative to IBR, but more of a general statement about big infrastructure projects, was that doing these forward-thinking equity goals and agreements and aspirations are great, but oftentimes get met with, well, that should have happened months ago, and it's too late now, and that these equity things are developed when it's past big decision-making time. And that the only people that are paying attention to it or implementing it are those who either care about the issue or just the equity team itself, within itself. And so really trying to talk about, again, how do we make sure that this goes beyond just the equity team and here at the EAG, but throughout the entire program. From all the way up from the WSDOT, NODOT, all the way down to the developers and contractors on construction sites. Another thing that was brought up that could be more clear, actionable, is that there's some words in the glossary, such as segregation and displacement, that are mentioned only in the glossary and not within the document. Another thing that was pointed out that might be made more clear is the idea of moving past just preventing harm, but more talking about redressing historical harm, and more conversations around mending some of the gaps and disparities. And how might we prepare to address those challenges was something that our group didn't quite get to, but was slightly inferred by making sure that this document, when it is completed, that we are clear about who is to hold whom accountable, who is to use this as a guiding North Star, if you will, and understand our reach as a program on how far we can take this and hold others to this standard that we're trying to hold ourselves to. If anyone from my group want to speak up on anything I might have missed, but I try to take the comments and put them into the question format.
I think one of the additional things that we talked about was when we talk about accountability and when we create these equity frameworks and try to implement and hold people accountable, sometimes these are great ideas, but people struggle with how to implement. And so I guess we were wondering, are we resourcing someone to help with the implementation at all of the different levels, or resourcing, bringing someone on to help with the accountability of implementation of equity, because equity typically has a cost to it, and have we built that cost into this framework as well?
Amazing input. That's really good stuff. Anything else from your guys' group? Say anything else? That was a lot. So thank you for all that. How about the next group?
I took notes for ours.
Robert?
What's up?
Go for it.
So we talked a lot about definitely concerns about what we're able to promise or what we're able to really do as a program, and wanting to be clear and hopefully, or in some way make it clear in this document, what we can influence, where we can influence it, and what we can't. What are those lines? We talked about the one thing that was positive about it was it is transparent. It's a tool of transparency, and we just need to be as clear and continue to be as transparent as possible in that sense of what we can do with it. One thing, so how are we going to support it to be actually used throughout the program by decision makers as well as policy makers? How can we educate folks to utilize it so that it doesn't just hinge on someone from the equity team being at the table? And otherwise it's just as Alicia said, otherwise it's just a cute document, and we definitely don't want that to be the case. Let's see, we talked a lot about the challenges as far as, a lot of times we are subject to what elected officials say publicly, and what is perceived to be what they promise. And then if we are unable to deliver on that, that puts us in a tricky spot. We don't want that to we don't want that to come across as, oh, we didn't adhere to the equity framework. I don't know how we exactly do that, but it's something to certainly be aware of. And again, speaks back to the need to be clear about what we can influence, what we can't. And yeah, I think that's the gist, but group, please add to what I said if I missed anything.
Okay, thanks for sharing, Jake. So I'm assuming there's nothing else from anybody else from your group. I'll jump into our group's comments. So so similar to the first group, I think there was sort of a general sense of, hey, we're on the right path with this in terms of the intent, the language, but then there's sort of these questions about implementation. So one piece of commentary was kind of borrowing from the City of Portland's results-based accountability approach or framework, and looking at the community level, organizational and program level, and like what we do, how will we do it, and who will benefit from, or who will be better off from what we're trying to accomplish here. We had a question in regards to just sort of how quickly things are moving as part of this process, and whether there's a way to be able to make sure that this framework is able to influence these, this work and these decisions, this technical work that's taking place, and whether things need to slow down a little bit in that regard. Also, in terms of let's see, just making sure that we have alignment across the program and the various different teams, which is to some extent called out in the document, but like, how do we actually achieve that? And a couple people mentioned a concern about communities of concern and some of the different terminology that is used in the document, including marginalized or excluded. So just getting on the same page, making sure we've got the right terminology moving forward. And let's see here. Yes, so and then going beyond avoiding further harm and talking about, well, what happens if there is harm, including the potential for compensation, what are the legal requirements, as well as how can the program go above and beyond, basic compensation. We talked about community benefits agreements, such as a percentage of project costs going for community benefits agreements as a way to go above and beyond the sort of the do no harm approach. So I think that captures a good amount of what our group talked about, but I wanted to see if I missed anything, if anybody else wanted to call out to anything else.
I just will jump in really quickly. Chris, thanks so much for that overview. And this is Caitlin, City of Portland. I just noticed how each of the groups kind of talked about the challenge of how this gets integrated to the program and lives beyond the document. And maybe it's something we can just kind of keep brainstorming on, but just thinking of like, once we do have the outcomes identified, wonder if there's even a way to just make it like, just to communicate it more, to have it on the website, to have it through whatever external communications we're doing, to show kind of that accountability and just be super transparent in what we're saying we're doing. And then maybe it can evolve through time in terms of kind of having some updates on, how are we doing against these as the project goes along. So I don't know. It just seems that was a common thread that everybody seems to be concerned about. So trying to think about ways to address it.
Yeah, naturally, right? Because we're kind of like in some ways in sort of the pseudo midway point with this program, which has been talked about before, all this environmental assessment that's been done and so on and so forth. And then on top of it, we've had additional work taking place as part of this program over the last, gosh, what's it been, like 9 years or 9 months or so. So, so how do we make sure there's alignment? I like this idea of having that reporting back in assessment and communication and realignment, having sort of a circular process like that. I think based on the input that we've received up until this point with this conversation, if we were to kind of incorporate that into the framework, we'd have ourselves a really powerful document, even above and beyond I think what was the term used, a cute document. So thank you for saying it's cute, first of all, but going beyond cute to powerful. So how can we get there? And I think some of a lot of the input that you guys provided today will help us get there, along with the steps that are going to be needed in order to make sure that the implementation is effective. So one of the first steps that I will pose for questions is, I think we're going to need a little bit of vetting between now and building between now and our next EAG meeting. I personally would welcome, a subgroup to dig in on some of these questions that you've raised, because you've raised some really good questions. The question is, how do we translate that into actionable pieces to this document? So any thoughts about that concept, about that idea, getting together and between now and the next meeting and trying to get some forward momentum?
Yep, I think it's a good idea, and we can send out an email or just communicate via email if you're interested in that. And we can make sure that that happens in similar fashion as the other subgroups.
I was going to say, we talked about having a subgroup focused on this framework. And between now and the next meeting, if we've got some willing volunteers to do that, it would be great to have that sort of deep dive meeting with folks. I know we've got at least one volunteer, but I'm looking at you, Caitlin, if that's still the case.
Can we get a little show of hands here? I think
Yeah,
Stephen,
Steve's hand is up.
are you saying you're volunteering, Stephen? Or do you have another comment?
I am going to volunteer and I'm going to make a comment.
Okay, great.
Because I'm
I'll take it.
volunteering.
So Caitlin and Stephen, anybody else want to raise their hand on this one? Anybody else interested? We have a lot of busy people, so that's understandable too. If we can just get like a third person, I think that would create a real strong.
And we'll send it out.
Come on.
And we'll send it out an email for
What
those.
kind of incentives we got to provide here?
We'll send it out an email for those who are unable to be here as well.
So Lily says yes,
Oh,
and
Lily says yes. There we
I'm just
go.
gonna really quickly, Brent, how many folks for public comment?
We don't have anyone sign up for public comment.
Okay, back to Chris.
Yeah. Well, let's kick it back to Stephen. Stephen, you had a comment you wanted to make?
Yes.
And
so,
Nikotris is also raised.
Okay, great.
okay.
Oh, a question, comment.
Okay, cool. I'll be quick. So in the introductory framework, the first line about harms, I know there's a lot of transportation studies where you can actually quantify and put a dollar amount to the harms. I think if you want to make it powerful as a document, let's be specific about the harms and what the social, economic, and environmental costs have been so that we actually name them. That was my comment.
Great.
How do we do that?
Yeah.
Jake?
I think, I mean, is that where we could have data on existing disparities?
Yes, I like that. We also have a section that we didn't include in this, but it's a separate document, Jake, that you feel free to describe, but it talks about those historical impacts and those historical injustices. It doesn't talk about the existing inequities, which I think is a really good idea to quantify that. But Jake, did you want to speak to that? And I do think, I think, you know, if any of you actually have data on existing inequities in the Portland area that are related to the themes that we're talking about here, I think we should definitely weave that in. But Jake?
Yeah, there's another document. We had thought about including a historical context kind of overview in this, as well as some demographic data, but I have that in a separate document that we were thinking as an appendix, or possibly as kind of a resource / tool. But yeah, it talks about the history of different elements in the program area, and then demographics and the disparities to the extent of, like, say, median incomes by race. But there's certainly more we can that we can populate that with, and then incorporate actually into the narrative, I think. So yeah, I like that.
Okay. Stephen, was there anything else you wanted to convey? No? Nikotris?
I was gonna say I'm happy to help. I'm a little concerned about the meetings. Like I was trying to be on a subcommittee before, and then it just doesn't, like, the time doesn't match up. So like, I know we're getting the screening criteria. We can do something in the Google Doc. Like, I want to help, but I also am nervous about saying, like, sign me up, and like I can't meet any of those times you just said.
I feel you, Nikotris.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we got a lot of folks here with busy schedules. I mean, we have a month, so let's try to figure it out. So that's great. So we got Nikotris joining in too. So that makes 4. Anybody else wanted to comment?
I just had a question, and that was, and it could have already been brought up, and I just missed it. In our group, there was a question around the scope, how the equity framework would influence the scope of the project, and did that get mentioned at all? And it's really about, I think, the implementation. And, when we think about equity, it brings up different priorities, and then that also shifts your scope, or it can. And so just the room for that. And then also, I guess, as the framework is being developed, how is it applied to decisions that have been made before it was put forward? Has that already been mentioned? Okay.
I think it's an unanswered question, and it's something that, well, let me back up. In some ways, it's happening now, right? We talked about the screening criteria and how that's going to be utilized once approved to result in the goal as a much more equitable outcome in terms of a project. Some of the framework will result in contract specifications and sort of the direction that the program gives to a contractor as to how this project is built. But some of what we'll have to explore and offer as recommendations is how we want the framework to be integrated and to utilized. I don't know that there's anyone within the program team who knows. I think part of what we'll have to figure out is how to operationalize it. And there are a number of tools that we have, whether it's the equity index or the equity lens, so on and so forth. I think as a program team, we're going to have to step back and figure out how do we actually implement this? Otherwise, it is just another document. So that's going to be the vexing issue, is how do we integrate this in a meaningful way that results in more equitable outcomes.
And to me, that's definitely the idea behind that approach of saying we've got our objectives. Let's talk about outcomes, performance measures, the strategies that we use to get there, and then the specific actions that need to be taken to support all that. And I think we can really start putting some meat to that conversation and to that that really does start to address implementation more concretely.
Right, and the exciting piece is once we do sort of conclude in terms of the performance measures, we can hold ourselves accountable and all sorts of accountability. I know Caitlin mentioned sort of accountability tools, whether it's a dashboard, whether it's reporting on the website. I know, for example, the executive steering group will ask for this information. We had a presentation before the Bi-State Legislative Committee last week. They're asking for this type of information. So there's a significant interest as to what the EAG comes up with and what we come up with relative to the equity framework. And so my hunch is, just by being in those discussions, that there's a strong desire to integrate this work. I think we just have to paint the picture as to how.
So I want to be mindful of time. We have 3 minutes left. And Chris, is there a closing comment that you have before we do our closing?
Yeah, just to say that super amazing input as usual. The reason why we got into this point of being able to have I think part of what I heard, at least within our group and to some extent with the rest of the groups, is we have a pretty great product here. How do we implement it? How do we make it better, and how do we implement it effectively? But the reason why we're at this point is because of all the great minds, not just on the program team, but on the EAG committee. So thank you for all of this. Bring the best sort of thinking to the table here, and we'll make sure to keep on moving along to make sure that this thing meets your expectations. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chris, for your hard work. Can we have our meeting evaluation poll? And how about 2 takeaways? If people can give us 2 takeaways from our time together. Lily?
I just want to say a thing that I said in my small group, which was that I have been impressed with the degree to which this group has really heard the comments that have come out of the EAG and has actively incorporated them, even when I know it's very challenging, and at sometimes we're breaking new ground, and I just want to call that out. I appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you. One more. All right. Well, I just appreciate the documents, and I appreciate hearing about them because it helps ground me, and it gives me something very tangible to work with, which I really appreciate. All right. Next up, October 18th, 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. We will have our next meeting of the EAG. We're going to talk about the final draft of this equity framework and review design options, which is exciting, and equity performance measures. Also mark your calendars, November 15th, 5:30 to 7:30 is our meeting for November. All right, so I want to say thank you to everyone who came today, and be well, many blessings, and we get to see you in a month. So goodbye, everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks so
everybody.
much.